Nico is gone. Tennessee is searching for a new quarterback, and the college football world is reacting to this potential tipping point of the NIL transfer portal era. Welcome to the Volunteer State. I'm Tennessee beat writer Adam Sparks, along with John Adams of the Knoxville News Sentinel. You guys know what we're going to talk about, and it ain't the spring game. Let's talk about Nico Gate or Nico NIL Gate. I haven't decided what we're going to go with. He'll be at another school before decide on a moniker to call this. But Nico Iamaleava, the one-time five-star quarterback and Tennessee starting quarterback last season, is gone. He's headed to the transfer portal and ultimately another school. It's been one wild few days, but Tennessee is looking for a new quarterback. John, there's a whole lot to talk about, and everybody listening to this sort of knows some of the background. There's a lot to react to. But first, before we get started, I just want to lay out sort of how we got here. I do get this. Sometimes, John, I take for granted that everybody knows how this happened. It's sort of our everyday life. So I think sometimes people aren't. People have asked me, like, how did this escalate so quickly? And when did this start? So I just want to give you guys, you listeners, a quick rundown of just how we got here. This is a sort of a summary of numerous reports, not just ours, but others, some sources I've talked to, some reasonable assumptions we can make, and then, of course, our own reporting. So as quick as I can, here's the rundown of how we got here. In December, Team Nico, we'll call them. That's Nico's dad, his family, mostly his dad, an advisor or two, and sort of those representatives. Back in December, Team Nico wanted more help for Nico, wide receivers, offensive line, that sort of thing. They also wanted more money for Nico. They used the transfer portal as leverage to sort of drive up the price for him. Everything we understand is they shopped him around. Team Nico, as representative, shopped him around to other schools to drive up the price of what they could go back to Tennessee and use in negotiating power. Nico never went in the portal. We thought maybe he would. I tweeted the other day that my pre-write for Nico going to the transfer portal had been written since sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas. It was known that there was a possibility he could go. He never did, but he got so close that Mike Matthews, his wide receiver, actually did get paperwork to go into the portal back in January. So that's how close it got. Nico, as far as my dealings with him, and I think everybody else on the beat, has been a model citizen, great teammate, good to work with. He had a good spring. I think it's notable that he had a good spring while his father specifically was not on campus and was on the other side of the country. I think that was good for the 20, soon to be 21-year-old Nico. In the meantime, though, I would say late winter, early spring, Team Nico again started shopping him around to some other schools. Again, it was the same playbook: gain leverage, try to drive up the price, and then go back to Tennessee and say, hey, we need more money because School A or School B will give us more money. And then on, I guess it was Thursday, Pete Nakos of On3, a good reporter, plugged in well into the NIL world, the agent world of college football. He broke the story that they were renegotiating or seeking a new deal for Nico, something we had kind of heard, but he had a good source that he relied on to report that. Good for him, good reporting. I don't know who that source was. There was a thought that it was Team Nico. I think there's as much of a chance that it was somebody in UT's orbit or in the NIL Collective's orbit, because I think at that time they were sort of irritated that Team Nico had been shopping him around to other schools. And so I think that sort of kneecapped his negotiating power if he did leave, and eventually he did. Nico's dad denied the validity of the report, attacked the reporter. And then a few hours later, which was Friday morning, Nico didn't show up to practice, cut off communication with coaches and administrators, the collective, I believe, teammates to some extent. And that was sort of the end. That's when it was over. Josh Heupel, last I talked to him, he had not spoken to Nico, and this is multiple days later. So, John, with all that being said, give me your first takeaway. I know you got 100 of them, but give me your first one.
Well, I think back to when Tennessee signed Nico or even got a commitment from him. it was pretty daunting looking at that last name. And I'm going to have to spell it all the time. And I'd like to learn how to spell it without having to look it up every time. So I broke it down into I am a Leva. I am a Leva. So
he's a lever. He's not
me,
he's not a stayer.
He's not a stick around guy. So maybe that was foreshadowing if we were watching a movie that I am a Leva, and he was a Leva, and now he's gone. I'm looking, of course, in our work, we look at the internet daily, all the publicity, even beyond sports, the sports realm, all the stories being published about this. It's kind of a watershed event in the NIL transfer portal era. And looking at all those, I think of boxing promoters who will tell you any publicity is good publicity. So Tennessee can take some solace in that. It lost a quarterback, but it's getting a lot of publicity out of this. I guess the thing, when I look at it now, you're right. It was so poorly handled on Nico's end. And I'm assuming his father, maybe there's an advisor, family advisor, somebody who gains the confidence of the player and the family, usually the family that they trust. And I'm not sure these people have ever read The Art of the Deal, authored by a fairly well-known political personality.
Oh, John.
I don't think Donald Trump would have handled it this way. But I think Nico could have probably gotten some more money because he had so much leverage. I wrote a column initially, getting ready to go out of town on vacation. I wrote a column saying, at this situation, when it first broke, if this is the case, if he could be leaving, he has all the leverage. However, I had no idea that the supposed asking price was $4 million. You have leverage if you play your cards appropriately. And I guess I was wrong to assume that Nico's advisors or family would do that. But like I said, I think he could have gotten a few $100,000 more because of the timing of it, the leverage involved. Tennessee is a playoff contender next season. It made the playoffs this past season. So it's got to think short-term advantages and disadvantages. It's an advantage to have your quarterback returning. So he had some leverage, but used it very clumsily and asked for too much, I think.
Yeah, art of the deal. If Nico ends up at UCLA in that state, the taxes he would face would be similar to you could call them tariffs, I suppose.
What is the tax there now? It's in the teens. I'm not sure exactly what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it would make Tennessee $4 million be like California $3 million, which is sort of defeating the purpose, right? And we don't know where he's going to end up. At least while we're recording this, last conjecture I saw was UCLA, North Carolina, which that would be interesting. Bill Belichick and Nico's dad in a room, and Tulane, who lost their quarterback to a $4 million bidder in Duke. So we'll see where he ends up. Let me, and we're going to get to that. It's terrible advice. I think mostly from his dad and a few other advisors. I think the anger came out of his dad and a few others on Twitter the other night when the story was broke. Because I think the original plan was that they were going to get Nico through spring practice, do that last practice, go through the spring game, and then he could deal with things from there. And that's where you could think about the portal, and some of this would come out after that. And so he would not have to face the music of the fan base and even media, because his last media appearance was going to be at the end of the spring game. So I think it was more. I think it wasn't frustration on Team Nico's side that this was happening or this was out. I think it was frustration that it got out before spring practice was over, because it had been going on a while. And once it got out there, okay, so that's the first thing is, like, if you know a story is true, don't attack the reporter who reported it, because you know Nico's dad attacked Pete Nakos the other night on Twitter, and called him a few names, and then a few hours later, Nico didn't show up to practice. Well, that pretty much validated everything that had been reported to that point. You can't deny it, and then the player not show up to practice. And so at that point, I think all his teammates and coaches knew this was 100% for real, that he was probably going to leave. So there's bad advice on that part, bad dealings with his dad and Team Nico. Bad advice to tell him not to go to practice. I think Thursday night when this was all out, it was the fan base was somewhat split about whether they thought Nico should get paid. They were sort of on his side, or they were on Tennessee side. Once he skipped practice and cut off communication, like, everything tilted against Nico. Is terrible in terms of business, terrible in terms of public relations, terrible in terms of negotiating, because there's just not that much negotiating power now. You can't play Tennessee off of anybody else, because Tennessee actually took the initiative and said, before you quit, you're fired, is how this went. And so any other school that Nico goes to negotiate, they can't say, well, Tennessee's going to give me X number of dollars. Everybody already knows Tennessee's done with him. So I suspect maybe, boy, and this is a hard one, because I'm a parent. I have two kids, two girls that are around Nico's age. And so if you want to get on my bad side, criticize me as a parent. But I've dealt with Nico's dad to some extent, and a lot of other reporters have that I know. And so I'll criticize Nico's dad to this extent, is that he's given him so much bad advice and not given him any autonomy at all to decide where he wants to be. Because I think Nico would still be at Tennessee if it was up to him. He's done so much of that I fear that if Nico doesn't reach his full potential, that when he's 30 years old, he's going to say, Dad, why did you do that to me? I was at an SEC program. I just went to the playoff. I was in a good spot. I was making good money, $2.5 million. Why did you make me not go to practice? Why did you tell me to hold out, essentially? Why did you tell me to leave my teammates? Why did you tell me to not answer the phone of my head coach? Dad, why did you tell me to not answer the phone or text of boosters who paid my salary? I think that was maybe his biggest mistake. I feel for Nico a little bit in this instance, but he is technically an adult, so I think one day he could regret this. But maybe he ends up somewhere where he puts up a ton of yards and he ends up a first-round draft pick. Who knows? But as we're sitting here right now, this looks like a really poorly executed move.
Adam, I think everybody assumed, had he stayed at Tennessee as planned and settled for a mere $2-point-something million, that he would be a high draft pick in 2026. But I really wondered, after watching Nico in 24, I think he has a lot of room for improvement. He's got the big-time arm, but processing information on the field, making those quick, crucial decisions, something he could definitely get much better at, and I think repetition certainly would have helped. Also, I think he could use another coat of armor. My point is, I think Nico would be better off, particularly after what's happened now, is playing 2 more years in college and then going pro. I don't think he should rush out the college door, because he has room for improvement in a number of areas, and I think it would really enhance his opportunity in the NFL if he stayed in college, wherever he goes. I just think he was the thing that surprised me the most about Nico, and looking at his career in past tense now, is he's not the quarterback I thought he would be. And I'm not just speaking in terms of production or talent. There's no question he has an NFL arm. He can make throws a lot of NFL guys can't make right now, that deep out on the line. He's got that prototypical NFL height you love to see, 6'6", all that good stuff. And he's tough enough. He doesn't shy away from contact when necessary, when he's trying to get an extra yard or two. But he doesn't have that knack for improvisation that I thought he was going to have. I thought he would be elusive. I thought he was kind of a guy who might break from the pocket and scramble across the field, back and forth, make huge gains with his leg. He was better as just on running plays that were designed for him to run, not improvisationally and not as a scrambler. He just didn't have those quick movements. Part of it might have been those long legs, but he wasn't the instinctive runner that I thought he would be after watching him in that Citrus Bowl against Iowa. Just got a preview, I guess, and it was, it misled me as the kind of quarterback I thought he would be. I thought he would be a tall Johnny Manziel. He was nothing like Johnny Manziel. So he's got a ways to go for improvement. He's still got the arm that won't change, but I think he needs some time for development, and I think it would have helped him to stay at Tennessee. And if he does make his next decision wherever he goes, I think he should keep not just the money, and maybe his father will think about this, but the developmental aspect of it in mind, because I think that's really important. Let's not just think, if I were his advisor, I wouldn't just be thinking short term. I'm thinking long term about the breadth of his career. What could he turn out to be? And I think all of this was pretty short-sighted.
Yeah, short-sighted is a good way of putting it, because if you sort of plan this out of where Nico could be if he took door one instead of door two, he could have really had a really good season at Tennessee and then been a high draft pick. He goes into the draft. He could have reevaluated after a year and decided if he wanted to stay at Tennessee or go elsewhere in the portal. Now leaving, he's got to reset things in a short period of time with another offense. He's got to shake the stigma now that he's not a leader, that he abandoned his team on the last day of spring practice. You can shake that with good play, but he is going to have to shake that. And if he does go into the draft a year from now, he's going to have to answer questions about that. Honestly, he would. And NFL scouts, executives, personnel, they get right down to the bare bones of it. And if he goes into the draft a year from now, every team is going to sit him down and say, "Is your dad going to call me? Like, if we draft you?" That's a real thing, because they're not answering that call. So is your dad going to be a problem? Because we need to know that, because everything that we've talked to in college is that your dad, when the phone rang, people didn't want to answer it because they didn't want to talk to him, which is funny because none of us could ever talk to him in the media. That's a different conversation. But, the funny thing is we were going to see more of what we wanted to see out of Nico, his skill set, if he had stayed. A lot of he's gone now, so we can sort of talk about it. A lot of the stuff in spring practice was centered around quarterback runs, a lot of design quarterback runs. They were going to use Nico's legs. They were going to put him out in open field. They were going to roll him out more. They were going to simplify runs so that they could use him in the ground game more. So there was, he was going to show more of his skill set had he stayed. That being said, I do think, aside from all the money stuff, I still think the primary reason that he is gone is because of money, wanting more money. I think a secondary reason was he wanted more help, offensive line, wide receiver, so on and so forth. And that's one of those things that I think could have a tail to it after he's gone. Because he is gone now. They're going to bring in another quarterback. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I think Tennessee had some holes in its roster already, and I think those could be exposed even more now that Nico's gone. They need another wide receiver. I think the offensive line I think is better than most people think, but I do think that was a factor, and I think there was a factor back in December, January. One complication of that is if Nico's asking back in January, if he's asking for a raise of $1.5 million, but also saying he wanted new wide receiver or another offensive lineman, that's going to cost, another $1 million. Like, dude, which one do you want? Do you want a lot more money, or do you want money spent to get you help? And you kind of have to say one or the other, because it's a little bit too much to ask for both. And by the way, the level that he played last year was not up to par with $2.5 million. I know the market is what the market is, but if you walk into your boss's office and ask for a raise because the market says salary for your position is higher than it used to be, you have to also ponder whether or not your boss was pleased with how you performed on your previous pay. And I think Tennessee thought that he didn't play up to his $2.5 million. It was hard for them to give him 3.5 or 4 or whatever. But I think that complicated things. Do you want more help, or do you want more money? And I think both signals were being sent to Tennessee and the NIL collective, and that makes it a little tough. And I do think that hampered Tennessee a little bit of getting him some help. Does that make sense, John?
Yes, it does. I if I were advising Nico again, if I were in that position anyway, I would really have emphasized the help part as opposed to the monetary part. Again, looking long term, not short term. I think now when we get into NIL discussions, they begin with quarterbacks, then move to wide receivers and offensive tackles, maybe cornerbacks, maybe a pass rusher. But these positions seem to be of more prominence now in today's game. But I do think Tennessee failed in the transfer portal. It failed to get a playmaker at wide receiver. It needs one. Didn't get one. And there were so many players available. When LSU can go out and get Berrien Brown from Kentucky and get Nick Anderson from Oklahoma, who really excelled as a freshman at Oklahoma. He was hurt last year, didn't play. LSU already had 2 receivers better than anybody Tennessee had. And now they got 2 more that are really proven receivers. That's just one example. There are 4 or 5 other SEC schools, Texas A&M, Auburn, Ole Miss, all got more proven wide receivers. That's just the way the game is played now. Wide receivers are more valuable than running backs. You could say that about the NFL too. But Tennessee failed for that. Now, why did it fail? Maybe they think they're okay at wide receiver, but I kind of doubt that. So to your point, maybe there's only so much to go around. I kind of like to say, since no salary cap, I like to think, oh, well, there's just all this money flying around out there. You just rake some of it in, put it in a bag, and hand it to whatever you need. A wide receiver, here's a bag for him. Here's a bag for an offensive tackle. Like as though it's unlimited money. And of course it isn't. So, but Tennessee needs help at that position now. And I wonder if Tennessee now may end up paying a quarterback as much or more in the portal than what it paid Nico. I think that's a possibility.
Depends on who they get. It depends on who they get. I think so. Yeah, let's move forward with the Tennessee side of this. Moving on, I think this quarterback search it could go along similar to a coaching search. When there's a coaching search, immediately people have like 3 names out there that are just home run hires. Go get John Gruden and Nick Saban and the ghost of Vince Lombardi, right? And then you get to the second tier, and people are mildly disappointed, but they're good with the second tier also. You get the second tier, and then those coaches don't pan out. You can't land one of those, and then you get to the third tier, and people start throwing their arms up in the air and say, "How did we get to this point? We should have got somebody much better. The guy we lost was better than this, and these sort of things." I hope for Tennessee's sake it doesn't get to that point, but already, and we're recording this on Monday afternoon. Already, you've seen names that float out there like, "Hey, could they get Avery Johnson at Kansas State? Could they get Sam Levitt at Arizona State? Could they get Haynes King at Georgia Tech?" And maybe, hey, if they do, awesome. At least a couple of those names, I think you would be better suited for Tennessee than Nico. But it's going to take a lot of money. I mean, Avery Johnson at Kansas State, he's from Wichita. I can't imagine that guy's he's a fixture in that community. The thing is, here's the thing, John, if you go and get a top tier quarterback that's already starting and established and older, because you want an older guy, because you have younger quarterbacks already, you want like a 1-year rental. If you do that, that guy is going to be that school's Hendon Hooker. Like that school's veteran quarterback that everybody loves, that's tied into the community, that's the face of that program. It's hard to go in and steal somebody's Hendon Hooker. Now, maybe if they're making $1.5 million and you offer $3 million, maybe you can pull one of those guys away. But I think that's probably what it's going to take. And if you can't get one of those guys, then you go to the second tier. And the second tier would be guys that would come in and know they were going to start, but it wouldn't be a sure thing that they would be a hit. Third tier would be guys that would come in and compete with Jake Merklinger for the starting job. Like they could pan out, but you're not sure, and Jake Merklinger has a head start in the offense, and so you'd go into August and compete. John, do you think they get and the transfer portal opens Wednesday, so I think we'll have an answer by the end of the week. But, John, do you think they get first tier, second tier, or that third tier, just a guy that can compete with Merklinger?
Well, when you say third tier, you would like to think that Merklinger has a job. If it has to dip down to the portal for a third-tier quarterback, then you have Jake Merklinger, who went through the system last year as a freshman, played next to nothing, but played. He's a pretty good runner, pretty good passer. He's, as I said, a 4-star recruit. You'd like to think he has that, could be better than what you would get in the third tier. You made the analogy with coaches. Gosh, third-tier coach at Tennessee. Tennessee's had a few third-tier coaches in their coaching searches. That's what they got with Jeremy Pruitt. He was a third-tier coach, and we saw how that worked out. I can name some others, but I won't impugn their careers because they've moved on. I think the name, when you list those names, the one that grabs me is Sam Levitt.
Yeah, I mean, Sam Levitt is a guy that at Arizona State, at least his coach has opened up the possibility of some of those guys leaving, that he understands that guys are going to go get their bag, so to speak. And so if Levitt was I just think it would take a lot of money to pull Sam Levitt out. Do you agree?
Yeah. When we talk about this coaching search, you think you have the wide world of college football. You really don't. You're not getting anybody from the SEC because of an SEC rule.
Yeah, the rule in place says you can't go SEC to SEC. So that's off the table. A lot of people have asked me about those type of possibilities. Go get Diego Pavia or somebody like that, and that's just not going to happen. So you've got to go outside of the conference. Those upper tier guys that we're talking about are premier starters that would come in and immediately be the guy. The second tier would be guys that are.
I was looking at schools, and I think
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, John.
I think the Big 12, there's a few schools in the Big 12. That's kind of where I would be looking because the Texas Tech, Arizona, Baylor, these, to name a few, run an up-tempo offense. Don't you think that's kind of significant because you're not going to go through a spring training. You're just going to go into the fall once you sign with Tennessee. And quarterback has a lot on him in the up-tempo spread where he's got to make a.
Yeah, I mean it's a hard sale to a quarterback because the guy that you bring in, you're going to say you're not going to have spring practice. You're going to have to sort of learn this offense with teammates and through film and on your own until August. There's just not going to be. There's not a lot of upside for a guy to come in and just try to learn the offense in the summer, unless it's a lot of money. And that's why I wonder if second tier, third tier is what they're going to get. Again, if you're doubling their pay and it's a huge payday, I mean, some of the guys we named, I don't think are going to have like really long NFL careers. So this could be their payday. But if you're bringing in a second tier or third tier guy, I think that's where you have a chance. Maybe the guy's a hit, but then otherwise you have to go to Jake Merklinger. I mean, here's the thing. Joe Milton would have been considered a second tier when he came in. Guy that started for a little bit at Michigan, had phenomenal ability. I think he would have been a second tier. Hendon Hooker also started for a little while at Virginia Tech, lost his job. He would be like Hendon Hooker would be a low second tier. And he ended up being, one of the best quarterbacks Tennessee's had. So these things can work out. I think Tennessee maybe needs to look at fit more than they do, price tag or experience. I do think a dual threat, a running quarterback, is essential. I think you've got to have a guy that can do something with his legs, because if that's something where you could simplify the offense, let that quarterback get comfortable, and then sort of go from there. And I think that's going to be essential to whoever that they bring in. But Merklinger can do some of that. I promised we wouldn't talk about the spring game, but the spring game the other day, I think there was a false notion a little bit from some people that thought George McIntyre was the better of the two quarterbacks because George McIntyre threw like 3 or 4 touchdowns in the spring game. Merklinger didn't. Guys, listen. McIntyre is going to be a really good player. McIntyre is still learning the offense. McIntyre was playing against third-string players and some walk-ons. Merklinger is still ahead of McIntyre. And so if this comes down to a competition, Merklinger is going to have the better shot of the two. But, it's a long time between now and the season, but it's a short time if you're going into the portal. John, are you more interested to see where Nico finishes or who Tennessee brings in?
Well, I'm writing columns. I did write columns about Nico, but those days are gone. So I'm writing about Tennessee. So I'm much more interested in what Tennessee can bring in. I am curious about where Nico will end up. Some of the schools you mentioned, UCLA, a program was so bereft of NIL money that its head coach, Chip Kelly, former head coach, abandoned it for an offensive coordinator's job at Ohio State because he thought, I'm not going to win many games here. UCLA didn't have that kind of money. And then you mentioned Tulane. I can imagine this scenario if Nico's dad were talking to Tulane and Tulane spokesperson says, we'll give you 4. And Nico's dad says it's a done deal. But Tulane meant 400,000, not 4 million. So, and later they can say, well, that's semantics. But you talk about that school, those schools, that is a deep, deep fall from Tennessee and the SEC. A playoff team in the SEC, and UCLA and Tulane. Wow.
Yeah, an interesting thing about UCLA is that's where Madden Iamaleava, that's Nico's younger brother, 4-star quarterback. That's where he was. That's where he was committed for the longest, and then on signing day flipped to Arkansas. Got to think money had something to do with that. So there was a strained relationship, I would say, with UCLA, but then maybe they're going to reconcile to get Nico, and maybe down the road to get Madden. I mean, the thing is, in college football right now, I think there's feelings are not hurt for long as money can fix it. And bad blood can turn good just overnight. And there's not a whole lot of sense of loyalty, I think, between player and coach, player and program, and even to some extent, fan base and player. Because once Nico didn't show up to practice on Friday, boy, you saw this fan base flip on him, and it has been fury. I would say ever since. I think there's going to be some fans UT fans hate watching Nico this season, just hoping he fails. I should say you can do whatever you want, but I would say don't necessarily hope that he fails. Hope that his dad and his representatives maybe feel some regret of the advice that they gave him.
Yeah, I think his dad in the next few days, he should be frantically searching the internet on how to make a deal.
The sad thing about this
a lot of time, huh?
I was going to say that the sad thing about this situation is, from the start, and this happens a lot with quarterbacks. It happens with AAU 5-star basketball players too, but it happens with quarterbacks a lot in recruiting, is they start to be treated by their people like a brand more than a person. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying they're interpersonal relationships. I'm saying outwardly it makes it look like a brand more than a person. And, one small example is, well, I'll give you a couple examples. Nico didn't show up to one of the TV production meetings. Cole Kublik talked about this on his show today. Didn't show up to an SEC network meeting. That's where you go in, you talk with the guys who are going to be calling the game on TV, and they talk to the player, get to know them, find some tidbits they can mention on air. Get the sense of their personality a little bit. Nico skipped one of those, which may seem like nothing. That almost never happens, especially with the quarterback in college football. That's one of your major off the field responsibilities. When the network says be here, you're there. You sit down, you talk to them, you're cordial, and you give them some information, and then that's it. He didn't show up to at least one. I think it was only one of those. His people would not allow interviews outside of, well, not with a player. We get interviews with Nico, but nobody on his side would cooperate really to tell his story. I tried several times over the past couple of years to get an interview with his parents, with his family members, and I had a couple of interactions with them, and they were polite and all that. But there's something that people need to understand. When you interview a player's family, you can tell some personal stories of them. You can give some background. You can give some color to a brand and tell fans about that guy. And then those stories are repeated over and over and over, social media, other media outlets, on TV 1,000 times. You get to know their personality, and fans get to know them and like them and like things that are represented by them by reading those stories. And Nico's people had zero interest in doing that. I tried several times to interview his family. They wanted nothing to do with it. I was looking back at my old text messages. We offered at the News Sentinel, myself and a photographer, to fly out to California and sit down with his family. Zero response, no response at all. I talked to some other reporters just to make sure I wasn't the only one getting the cold shoulder. I knew I wasn't, because nobody else has written anything from his family's perspective. And other reporters I talked to, one that I talked to that I've known for years was in Southern California on another assignment. and text the dad and said, I'm here. I'll be a few miles from your house all week. Can I sit down for 30 minutes and talk to you guys? And they actually responded and said no. And that was it. It's like, come on, buddy. Like, we're on the just sit down for a minute. And the thing is, part of that is some families are scared off by NDAs, non-disclosure agreements that are attached to NIL. But those, you can get around those quickly. You just tell the parents, hey, I'm not going to ask you about NIL. I just want to get to know what kind of kid was Nico. What are Nico's friends like? What is Nico's favorite subject in school? Tell me something about the family structure. He's got a bunch of siblings. What's that like? And when you get those stories, it's only positive for the player. It's only positive. I wrote a ton of stories about Hendon Hooker when he was starting quarterback at UT. Some about his faith, some about him loving basketball more than football as a young guy, ways that he used to learn scripture by flashcards on a refrigerator, ways of how he interacted with his little brother and his sister, things about where he thought he had a very serious health scare that was going to end his football career and how he dealt with that and got over that. I talked with Joe Milton's mom one night. I remember for like 2 hours on the phone, and his siblings, and told me all about how he had, overcome the shock of losing his baby sister, and how he didn't go to funerals for 15 years and then went to a funeral of his grandmother and all that background. And I've written many of those stories, and other people have too. Family members are not obligated to talk to reporters, but you're really missing out when you say no to everybody. The kid is missing out. You're putting the burden on him to tell his story. The point of reaching out to family members is you take the burden off of the player and let them tell the story. And again, I'll just say it. He came off more like a brand than a human being. And I think that's how now Tennessee is going to remember him that way. Because legacy of Nico at Tennessee is sadly not going to the college football playoff or beating Florida and Alabama in a single season. It's NIL money. That's what he's going to be remembered at Tennessee as, and that's sad because he's a good kid, he's a pretty good player, and just got some awful advice.
Yeah, you're right. When you tell those kind of stories, and maybe his dad wants to save them for the book of Nico.
The book that sells, and that's the thing. If you pay, SEC Network didn't pay for him to show up, so he didn't show up.
Well,
interviews with family.
I bet the folks at the SEC Network were shocked.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. There's a value beyond. I think this is the theme of all this. There's a value beyond the dollar that you're being handed today. There's your story being told has a value eventually. Staying at a school has a value eventually. Showing up to an SEC Network meeting where your brand is going to be, your image is going to be promoted on national TV. There's a value to that long term. It's just, but I think a lot of the decisions came down to what's the dollar figure that you can give me right now. And that's terrible short-sighted advice.
Yeah, I think that was the crux of it. And so Nico was never really humanized here. As you said, he was a brand. And as you were describing that and the interactions with the parents, I couldn't help but think of Hollywood stars, child stars, who parents manage them and control them. And a lot of those stories don't have happy endings. Think about Michael Jackson, one of the biggest of pop culture, the way he was managed, like a brand, not really like a son.
Yeah, and we'll see where it goes. Maybe he gets the right price and he gets the right situation and the right offense, and he takes off. He's got a lot of ability. I just don't know if it's gonna work out for him or not. for Tennessee, they're going to dive into the portal. They're going to get another quarterback. I think with Nico, they were probably 8-4 to 10-2, somewhere in that range. I think with Jake Berklinger, they're 6-6 to 8-4. I think the overlap between the two quarterbacks is 8-4, the ceiling versus Nico's floor. With another quarterback, it depends on who it is. They could be as good or better than what they could get out of Nico, or it could just be somebody for Jake Berklinger to compete against. It's going to make this season a lot more interesting. But I think they have to get a quarterback, and I think they have to get a receiver too, and they also have to try to keep the ones that they have in-house, because there are some players on the team that are going to look at who they bring in at quarterback to decide whether or not they're going to go in the portal. I don't think there's a huge exodus coming, but it could certainly be a couple of key players if they don't bring in a good quarterback. So, John, that's all I got on the topic. You want to add anything, or you want to sign off?
No, I'm good with that, Adam. I feel like we've been talking about this for weeks, and it's only been a few days, but it's been so odd, and Tennessee has become the focal point of college football, but not in a good way or a happy way.
It always these tipping points somehow always find their way to Knoxville. It's the biggest NIL contract in history at the time with Nico. It's in a federal courtroom suing the NCAA. It's the NCAA itself with the Jeremy Pruitt investigation. I think I spoke out loud a few days ago. Hey, this spring has been pretty quiet. Finally, a quiet spring, and so I made that happen. I suppose I put that out in the universe. So anyway, we'll have a whole lot more coverage about where Nico's going, but I think for fans, more importantly, who Tennessee is bringing in for its quarterback. A lot of other things going on in the football offseason. Tennessee's softball team is really good. They just beat the number one team in the country. Tennessee's baseball team is top 5 and still a College World Series contender as they go down the stretch well into the SEC schedule. A lot of things going on in the transfer portal. Basketball's rebuilding a team, both of them, Lady Vols and the men's team. And we have all that coverage at KnoxNews.com. As far as this podcast, share it, tell your friends about it, talk about it, and keep listening to it. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Volunteer State.